Today is August 27, 2014. It's Wednesday. Time we'll start a meeting at 4 p.m. I'd like to express our welcome to the board members here today. Jason Norland, our interim general manager. I'd like to acknowledge him. Bart Miller with our CFO. We have Carly Schindler, Joe Chinworth.
Saying it too fast.
I don't want to call out for a minute anyway. And then we have Mandy, our secretary. Wayne, Harold Wilson's doing our photographing for us today for our meetings being broadcast. Jay Parcell, Mr. Swallow with us. So I'd like to welcome everybody. We have a couple people that's in the audience today with us too. So what we would like to do is probably rearrange our schedule a little bit. We have some presentations that we presented to the board for wage and our salary compensation studies, which will be presented to us. Is your gentleman ready to hook on, or?
Yeah, Jake's gonna call him up here. And
so we'll wait just a moment. We'll get hooked on to a gentleman that's going to be doing a presentation on the Skype.
How are you? Good. We're here online. We'll let you know when they're ready.
Awesome.
oh,
Oh, there it is.
He's going to see the back of her head. So
hi Matt, I'm Carly.
Hi there.
I don't know if you can you see us and hear us okay?
I can.
Okay.
Just want to show everybody my head isn't this big in person. Certainly. Let's go to. I'm going to see if I can share my screen and see if that would work for the PowerPoint. Let's see.
Good. A signal to him.
Let's see if. Get a few things closed and a few things open here and see if I can't share my screen with you.
actually, we've got his screen on the bottom there, don't we?
That's us
I
on
mean,
the.
that's what he's seeing.
We have it.
I think we can see your screen.
Okay.
So we've gone ahead and we've opened our public meeting. We've got you first on the agenda. If you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself and go through your presentation. Then we also have Mike Swallow here from Personnel Systems, and after you're done, he'll present his presentation for us. And then you're welcome to hang on and Skype with us as long as you want to in our meeting.
Sure.
So we'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Okay, very good. Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to present and answer any questions that you might have about our proposal. In response to your RFP, we've prepared a work outline that includes a lot of employee participation and certainly a lot of decision maker input along the way. So I'll highlight some different areas there for all kinds of stakeholders at all levels to be a part of a study like this. I think it's been about 3 years since you've done a classification and compensation study. As our name suggests, public sector personnel consultants, this is all we do. We work with state and local governments throughout the United States, specifically in classification and compensation. Had a chance to do this for about 35 years as a company. The staff that I have, we've got about 130, 140 years of combined experience, and have a chance to design and implement just over 1,000 classification and compensation studies in that amount of time. We're not a big firm, but we're certainly big enough to kind of take on the work that we want to go after. Maybe do 35 to 40 comparable studies a year throughout the U.S., special districts, cities, school districts, colleges, universities. Done quite a bit of work in the utility and specifically electric utility world Just wrapped up some work for Grant County PUD up in eastern Washington. Did some work for City of Big Bear, Water and Power in California up in the San Bernardino Mountains. We do work every 2 or 3 years for 3 different agencies in Iowa: Muscatine Power and Water, Waverly Light and Power, and Cedar Falls Utilities. So some pretty good sized organizations there that we've had a chance to get really familiar with the world that you guys try to live in and try to compete in. It's a very interesting world. Our approach, which I've outlined, I'll go through this very, very quickly. You'll see a couple of themes. Partnership is one of them. We're big on transparency. We're big on participation from all levels of folks, from the employees and getting input on how they spend their time and their job description, their job duties, all the way up to and certainly including board, your senior staff, decision makers, policy makers. There will be some areas that we'll need some direction on, certainly some input on, and you'll see those. I'll highlight those. A couple of things that differ or really differentiate our firm a little bit. We only use full-time staff for all of our work. We've got staff that are certified in compensation, staff that are senior professional HR designated, and we only use full-time staff, so no subcontractors. The other big one, these bottom two bullet points, we're going to give you as many tools as we can to make you self-sufficient. Ideally, when we do a study like this, sure, we get it right. Hopefully you adopt it, you implement it, but hopefully we've also left behind tools for you to maintain it and use it on an ongoing basis, so that regardless of what drives that RFP question, whether it's where are we in the market, where do we need to be, are we able to recruit and retain, that you've got the means and the tools by which to answer some of those very common high-level questions as it relates to salary, benefits, classification. I'll try to highlight some different areas here where we've got employee input and participation, where we've got manager input. There's not really any administrative support that we need anywhere, but we'll certainly highlight some areas that I think are decisions that we'll need to engage a lot of folks on. The major components that I'll outline here: position classification, the study of jobs, looking at and if possible needing to update your job descriptions or job titles. We've anticipated and included in our project budget an opportunity to be on site, to do interviews, to do desk audits. If we need to update or draft new job descriptions, that's included in the work. A compensation survey, which I'll spend some good detail on, and that implementation support, so training, tools, and lots of leave behind. Position classification, just like it sounds, it's the study of jobs. I was interested in reading through your strategic plan and some of your vision and mission statements. You, to your credit, definitely mentioned classifications. You mentioned employees, the need to cross-train, pretty lean, I think, staffing model that can cause its own issues when it comes to the work that we'll talk about, trying to compare those jobs externally, being sensitive to folks that are wearing more than one hat or maybe needing to be cross-trained in more than one discipline. That's a little bit of a game changer in our world when we try to compare jobs and try to recommend pay for different jobs. But step one, engaging the employees in some type of questionnaire or job description update exercise, getting on site to collect information from employees, taking that information and recommending if we need to, anything different on job titles, job descriptions, looking at how you classify folks and who's eligible for overtime and who is not, updating job descriptions if need be. Various job description components, you'll see that these are oftentimes also called compensable factors. And so when we do classification, I want to be very sensitive to the kind of having the end in mind as far as compensation goes. What is it that drives the value of these jobs? Is it education? Is it certification? Is it work hazards? Is it work complexity? Is it working out in the field with little or no supervision? The need or the ability or the requirement to make good decisions out there in the field, whether they are safety-related decisions or liability decisions. All of those come into play and can be articulated usually in a job description as well. So we're kind of setting the stage for compensation. One of the things that is also mentioned in your RFP and I think in your mission statement, being competitive, that probably also is balanced with being responsible, being in a position where you're able to sustain an affordable approach to salary and benefits in order to compete. It's certainly not really cheap to recruit when you've got a lot of turnover. So I just want to talk about, and where we've got some critical decisions to make, who do you compete with to attract and retain staff? Where do you get people from? Where do you lose people to? So that's a very important day one conversation so that we can go gather data on your behalf and make those job matches. We're big on being in control of those job matches, so we collect pay plans and org charts and job descriptions from your competitors, from your comparators. We build a custom database for you. We try to answer as many anecdotal questions of where are we, hey, we're in good shape for some jobs, we're behind for others, as well as gather enough data so that we can make good decisions going forward. Where do we need to be? Where do we want to position ourselves, working towards that philosophy or that policy of positioning yourselves in a competitive position? I mentioned most of these. We'll use APPA as maybe as salt and pepper. The main course, I think, of a survey to make sure you're getting as much bang for your buck is building you a custom database, comparing your jobs based on actual job duties and not based just on job titles. To the extent that we need to supplement that data with published surveys, there's reliable data on the private sector available for your neighborhood. There's APPA for highly specialized jobs or jobs that are difficult to match. So some kind of nice balance, but we're big on building you a custom database and trying to compare based on jobs, not based on job title. I've got a couple of examples in the handouts. One is just an example of a benchmark job. I kind of intentionally stayed away from what I think are probably some of your classifications. This is an example of probably a more local Arizona comparator where we had a job title in the upper left-hand corner, permit technician. We tried to find the comparable position among all of its neighbors and then compare your, in this case, range midpoint to the average midpoint out in the marketplace. This is an example of a position that's in pretty good shape. It's within 1% of market. We may be able to answer some of those questions of where are we with a table like this. I want to try and, as an end result of the study, make sure that all jobs are consistently positioned in relation to market. Another example, probably on the municipal end, so some job titles here that you don't need to worry about, but the illustration would be, hey, I've got some jobs that are within 5% of market. There are other jobs that are a little bit below. When we're done, can we reassign jobs to different pay grades to result in variances of less than 5%? So can we get competitive at the midpoint? Can we get competitive on paper? And then talk about what it means for the people. It's very common when you do a survey, you find that some jobs are behind and some jobs are ahead. So it's also very important on day one, if we stand up in front of the employees, we tell them, hey, when you do a study, that's not intended to replace the annual adjustment or the annual COLA or the annual budget or the annual merit. And as such, when you do a survey, not everybody's going to receive an increase just as a result of the survey. You may still be eligible for an annual increase, but the survey should give us an idea of what the value of the jobs are before we talk about the value of the people. We can design different pay tables, salary schedules, and place jobs onto pay ranges based on your reporting relationships. If you've got career ladders or job titles that end in a Roman numeral, I want to be very consistent about creating opportunities for promotion, but also rooting that in differences in job duties, maybe differences in market values. We would go through and place jobs on a pay range using that market data based on classification review, any internal equity conversation that we want to have. There's open range schedules, there's grade and step schedules. I'd like to design tables that are going to enable you to administer pay on a variety of different ways, depending on what your budget allows, depending on what your environment or your culture might support, whether it's performance or it's time and job or it's market or it's cost of living. Lots of different factors would go into how people move left and right on this scale, so creating those opportunities too. I talked about this a little bit already, building that compensation plan, again, recommending pay ranges for all jobs, being sensitive to classification and promotable opportunities or vertical relationships within job families, recommending an overall compensation plan or strategy that aligns with that dialogue with you as the board. We need to be at market, we need to be at 105% of market, maybe we're only at 95% of market, and over a couple of years, we want to get back up to speed or catch back up. building you both policies, procedures, as well as tools, training, and materials to be self-sufficient, so that what we do lasts longer than the next 4 or 5 months worth of work, but instead is something that you can use on a regular basis, or really anybody can pick up and replicate and update. Just a couple more slides, an example of recommending pay ranges for every job. You'll see within this example, like in the office support group, this is a larger organization, but as an example, there's 5% between each pay grade. They have office specialists 1 and 2. We kept those 3 grades 15% apart. You can see where career ladders grow, where promotable opportunities exist, from office specialist to admin assistant to executive assistant. So building and maintaining some consistent patterns there. On this chart, where we have an asterisk, that meant that we used survey data as a guide or as a guideline for placement of those jobs onto the scale. Ultimately, telling you if there's any cost associated with updating a pay plan, adopting pay ranges, getting anybody that's below minimum up to minimum, identifying if there's 5, 6, 7-year people that are too close to minimum, maybe we want to move those folks a little bit farther into the pay range. So there's different ways to arrive at a fiscal impact discussion, and align that with that budget process. A couple of last slides here. Again, some highlights for employees to directly participate. We would anticipate inviting everybody to project briefings and handing out job questionnaires. Or if there's pretty current job descriptions in place, we can save you some money, we can save you some time, and maybe not go through that whole questionnaire and interview exercise unless there are areas that we need to be very sensitive to, or areas that you believe have changed. So different ways to get at that. But the end result is an assurance really that the employee is aware of the information and data that we use, both as the basis of our job title and job description recommendations, as well as any external comparisons, that the employees say, yes, indeed, this is what I do, this is what belongs on my job description. So really just kind of a double check that only the employee and their supervisor could verify. We've got quality assurance built in here where supervisors and managers sign off on the questionnaires. Maybe not change what the employee tells us, but supplement that and tell us if there's more additional information needed. Generically, I'll say management, whether that's your CEO or your human resources staff, the board or your designees, different opportunities here for some input and to make sure that we talk about where you get people from, lose people to, who need to be in that market mix, what we do with the survey data, if we want to position ourselves overall to be pretty competitive, and how we go about implementing that plan. What's the timing? What's the level that we choose to fund it? What is our ratepayer and their appetite for paying at market or being competitive? Those types of decisions that we're always very sensitive to. This last slide here, just a couple more bullets, a couple more highlights for you. Again, we're big on participation. We're big on communication and stakeholder buy-in. We only use full-time staff, so we're very, very in control of our calendars. We get very consistent communication from our project leaders. We've got subject matter experts. We spend our time, every year for, I've got staff that are on their 20th year with our firm, which is fantastic. We've been able to implement just over 98% of the studies that we've done. So we're kind of big on self-sufficiency. We're big on leaving you some tools, but then remaining available for ongoing technical support and advice if you had something that changed or something you had a question on. There's no long-term maintenance contract or anything like that with anything that we leave behind either. That at a high level covers, I believe, the presentation that I had. Is there anything that you wanted to see a little bit more of on the slides or spending more time on before we look at, or if you've got questions on the proposal?
I had a question. How does benefits work into your analysis?
Yeah, so what we have anticipated anyway would be, and I'll look at my quote here, my scope of work to kind of direct you to that pricing page. We had anticipated from your scope of work only a base pay survey. So if you need total compensation included in there, we would want to talk about the elements that we need to include, such as big ticket items, maybe pay health insurance premiums for employees, Maybe there's a pension plan that you contribute to. Does the employee have any responsibility to contribute in that as well? We did not interpret from the RFP that benefits would be included, but safe to say you could probably add about $2,500 depending on how much you needed us to collect on benefits.
Thank you.
Sure.
What kind of a timeline would we be looking at as far as your work goes?
I think between now and the end of the year, we get really close. I think about 90 to 100 days is what I had anticipated. There's a couple of key points that soak up a lot of time. If we need to engage employees in a questionnaire exercise, we get started on data collection on your behalf while employees are working on those questionnaires. So I guess picture a Gantt chart where a lot of activities overlap. Updating job descriptions takes a long time, but in this case it's good there's not hundreds and hundreds of them that we would need to write. So I would suspect that we would be done well in advance of the end of the calendar year.
On the cost for your major components, if we should not engage in this immediately, how long is your price schedule good for?
We can honor this for 6 months. So, yeah, 180 days, I would think.
Anybody else have any more questions or thoughts? Just one question, Matt, I'm going to ask you is on when you get involved in this, sometimes we look at scopes of work. What would you classify as outside the realm of sometimes companies will ask you for to do, would be maybe an additional charge if we got into it? Is there anything you think we have included in here that you may think we need to be involved with it? If it did, would that be outside your scope, or what would you think would be some of the costs now? So you don't get into something, ask you to do something, so that's outside the scope, and all of a sudden the bill keeps climbing, escalating on us.
Yeah, no, I think that we've anticipated, with the exception of maybe the benefits, there's quite a bit of room in here. We may not need to write every job description or rewrite every job description. You may tell us, hey, we just did our job descriptions. I mean, there's $5,000, $7,000 something right off the top, savings-wise, that if we just use your current job descriptions. But again, I want to ensure that the employees are aware of the data that we're using. So we can definitely have that dialogue. Really, the only thing, because this is almost as an all-inclusive as it comes. Short of asking a question about staffing levels. I think that we've anticipated everything except other than that benefits or total comp component. So you could maybe just add 15% to the survey line item there, to get us a little bit of room to collect some benefits data on your behalf. Somewhere in that $1,000 to $2,000 range would probably be safe. But I wouldn't think that anything else. There's always sidebar conversations that come up, whether it's staffing or that kind of thing, which really to me drives your compensation philosophy. It wouldn't be that difficult to answer questions about, if we had 10 survey comparators, how many people would they have? But I come back to that one is really about the only area, unless you wanted us to, redesign a merit plan or a pay-for-performance plan or something like that. We almost always, have the ability to link a pay plan, a pay range, and a performance review tool. That's included in here. But if we needed to engage the workforce in identifying performance objectives or do some training of their supervisors, that'd be about the only other thing that I could think of that would maybe bounce out of scope. So there's ways to make this very, very skinny or very, very wide. And in this case, we've got interviews, job descriptions, on-site visits, survey work. We've got just about everything that we could think of.
I think that's, board is, any other question I think would be good.
I think that's all the questions. Matt, did you have anything else that you wanted to add, or?
No, I really appreciate it. The calendars always get tough this time of year. It's an interesting time of year, so I really appreciate the opportunity to dial in for you. Certainly, if there are any other questions that are generated, as you make a decision, let me know, and I'll get right back to Carly. So.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Yeah,
man.
I'll sign off just so that there's not any speaker or bounce back or anything like that. So again, best of luck with the selection. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
You bet. Have a good one.
That's the same one we had last week, or last month, isn't it?
I think, did you get it?
Let's get
I don't
it.
see any splats, but
Gross.
he was sort of hopping there.
It was with Heber there. Well, I was gonna swap the flag, but he beat me to it.
Oh, but I didn't have any evidence, so I'm not sure of that.
I think he was.
All right, we'll turn the time over to Mike Sella.
Board members, it's a pleasure to be here. Appreciate the invitation. That was a great presentation. I thought that Matt did a heck of a job. Kelly was very well schooled in the business and been at it a long time. And their process probably isn't any different. And I think you'll see that here, that there's quite a lot of common ground, whether it be me, ERI, whether it be these good fellows, whether it be Hay or others. There's some tools and processes in this industry that will be very familiar. Human resource management is also my focus, personnel systems and services. I've been in the business since the mid-70s, either as a in-house consultant or as a member of an in-house team. Went out on my own in '88. Prior to that, I was on staff with the State Department of Human Resources here in Utah, and then legislation was drafted to eliminate my job. So that made it kind of interesting. And in fact, that was the only objective, was to eliminate the competition from the public arena with the private. It happened to be my ex-professor at BYU that spearheaded that legislation. Anyway, so that happened, and we agreed not to compete with the governor's office, and so that was on a Wednesday, and the following Monday I submitted my letter of resignation and became a consultant. Walked out, and so since '88, that's been what I have been pursuing, my relationships in the workplace. Also, exclusively public sector, for the most part. I have had a couple of pretty good private engagements, New Ways down here at the point of the mountain out there, that large corporation, worked with them, and a couple of other small ones. But also I am a owner and founder of TechnologyNet. I was out doing TechNet work earlier today, and that resource is providing a service, a web-based program to municipalities on a national basis. We haven't splashed in a lot of those states yet on the East Coast. We've got a couple of good ones out there. Good Midwest, but it's an info sharing environment. So that's kind of at the heart of this whole process, is info sharing and getting good data from sources. And the nice thing is that you've been part of that over the years, and so that does help mitigate some of the costs that we're going to talk about. So you've addressed this question. So here we have this. Is it true that the company policy is to pay at or above a prevailing rate in the marketplace for similarly situated jobs, both public and private? So we address that question here with you, and you may have already considered that here amongst yourselves, how you want to pursue your relationship. And so the market positioning is going to be key. That was part of the front end discussion and conversation, and we'll hit on that in a second again as well. But some key objectives in this whole project are, here's a short list. How competitive are we in the marketplace, and who is our market? Interlikely, that's the relationship of one job to the other, and why we can legally defend how we do pay one job different than another in the structure. Administrative proficiency of tools, to bring back into the table and add to the toolbox some methodologies, some enhancements. You've had a few of these things already in the past in place, and I have had the privilege of being involved with the organization and help creating those. They do require some fine-tuning over time, and if they're left unattended to, they can become dysfunctional. And so that is a question of how comfortable are the tools now, and is it time to revisit how those tools relate to the organization and how they're structured. Productivity incentives, that isn't really part of the project, and that was mentioned by my competitor there, that performance measurement and management hasn't yet fallen on the radar in terms of this project, but the worth of work versus the worth of worker is what this whole thing is all about. And so we're going to address the worth of the work on the front end, and then eventually the monkey will fall on the back of everybody here in terms of the worth of the worker and assessing their contributions. Compliance with laws and regulations. That's kind of a big element there. And I'll mention how the law itself influences the development of tools. Protection of the public funds and the public trust. And that's why you were all here and elected to the positions that you have. There is a trust there that we want to maintain. So when we talk about the core values, quick, easy statements. Management has the right to expect a fair day's labor. Employees have the right to expect fair day's pay. So the question then becomes, what is fair? How do we determine that? And how do we strategize to implement some of those fair perceptions? So here's a key philosophy that I would promote, and that is that when we talk about pay, and if it is or isn't appropriate, these are the elements. We've got the marketplace, available resources, organizational internal equity program, perceived value of that individual, and that perception is influenced by loyalty, dependability, and confidence. And so there's some key pieces. On the flip side of that, employees' perception of equity and consistency in pay may not result in greater productivity and efficiency, but if there is a perception of inequity and inconsistency, it will usually produce some level of discontent. So I don't know if that's going on here. And so you might know that. You're privy to all of that insight, feeling, and emotion, and the whole organizational current condition. So some assumptions that are made going into this study, that the company desires to achieve a reasonable level of competitiveness. We've kind of already determined that. Current standards want to be maintained, and you want to do that by attracting and retaining the most qualified employees. And in order to avoid becoming a trading ground, you do desire to provide career development opportunities where possible, competitive position and compensation. And does that mean you need to be able and willing to commit some resources in order to accomplish that mission? So those are some tough questions as you consider where you are in the lay of the land at this point in time and where you are coming from. So the worth of the work is at the heart of the question, and how we address that with these three key components: the prevailing market, the worth of the job, that's that internal methodology and structure, and that contributory value of the employee again. So when we address the value of the job, here are, as kind of the scatter look of typical position. All of the components of these jobs are on the lay of the land, and you see the list there: responsibility and difficulty, knowledge, work environment. That's before job analysis. So the process of gathering information, crucial to deciding what the job is, as you heard earlier this evening, is key to that process, whether it be position analysis questionnaires, those kinds of things, on-site job audits, desk audits. Those are common tools that would be incorporated if you elected to rebuild job descriptions. That is key. After you go through that exercise, you put it back together to paint the picture of equity methodology. And that includes these things. Responsibility is going to be defined as consequences, accountability, controls, and freedom, and supervision. Knowledge is going to be influenced by credentials. It's going to be influenced by specification requirements and statute. You've got guidelines right now that you have to perhaps comply with in terms of certifications and licenses, and where your talent pool comes from. Work environment, how dangerous is this environment? How much recognition does hazard uncertainty and other things get when you look at value in a job? And then difficulty in terms of every position's level, nature, and type of judgment requirements, and complexity of operations, decision making, and so forth. So we rebuild. So then, as we rebuild the job through the various tools and processes, so we get that employee engagement as well. I like to do an employee orientation on the front end of the meeting and explain to the entire workforce the process, how they are influencing the process or involved. They are subject matter experts, would be one way to consider them. And let them know, again, what doesn't happen as a consequence of this project. And that there are no promises. This is a fact-finding exercise. We want to learn the most we can about where we fall in the marketplace, and then address it. But when is it legal to discriminate in pay? What do you think of that question? Does that sound like the dirty question in the public arena? It kind of is, but in truth, whoever has the responsibility to manage human resources, that is their charge. They have to be able to defend. And the key word now to change is differentiate. Why and how can we legally defend and differentiate pay on a job-by-job basis? And so with the defensive nature of the outcome, you'll want to hang your hat. Fair Labor Standards Act, the law says it's okay to differentiate or discriminate in pay if it's based on skill requirements, effort, responsibility, and working conditions. And so those are the tools that we shape and mold as part of an internal equity tool. How do we establish a link to that framework, that legal environment? I submit that the process ought to involve the employees having an opportunity, and the management team and the board as well, to whatever extent you want to have some involvement, to say what values do we want to see as priority influencing our jobs. Is responsibility more crucial to the value of the job than is difficulty or job knowledge and work environment? I have tested that question on almost 9,000 employees from around the country, and I can just about predict the hierarchy order of importance. Typically it's knowledge, responsibility, difficulty, and work environment, but it may not happen that way. And that's the unique element here. We go through that exercise, and once that's finalized, what comes back to the table for you is what I call a site-validated pay methodology or internal equity system. So validation is kind of a nice approach. I think it's quite unique in its undertaking. The second piece to that puzzle is the market. You've heard a lot about market access, market interpretation, data influence and availability. What you don't know can hurt you. What is driving some of the interest in most organizations for this kind of work is attrition. Do we have things going on such as that? Are people leaving? And you've already heard about, we want to know where they're going, why, and those kinds of things. But if you've got stability in the workplace, one of the key elements that employees are after, then you may not have the same kind of pursuit going on with defining your marketplace. But are you willing to pursue this position at or above market? And once that dust settles on the data itself, what are the options? So can you afford to be the trendsetter? Would you want to go there? Are there issues that you're dealing with in terms of public image and perception that may lead you to one of these alternatives? More competitive than others would be, but about average or parity in the marketplace. What about comparability? And then finally, what can you afford? That's going to be one of the key questions at the end of the day. What is reasonable and what is keeping you in terms of the public fishbowl perception on solid ground? So employees have expectations with regard to your compensation programs, and those almost 9,000 folks have said, here are the key pieces from their side of the table. They want fairness in the organization. They want the consistent application of policy, practice, and procedure. They want loyalty, the same level of loyalty extended to them as you require of the employee as they work for you. And they like stability. And so these processes that you're entertaining help establish provide some stability and consistency and probably some loyalty as well. So we asked some questions of employees on the front end. This is where we get a little bit of their engagement. Do you think you're underpaid when you consider the value of your job? So this is a job classification question and issue. And 70+% of everybody I've talked to over these last 25, 30 years think that that's true. It may or may not validate. Once we get into the data and get into the process, the value of the job may absolutely be accurately established. So these are our perceptual questions. You think you're underpaid when you compare your rate of pay to others in the organization, doing about the same kind of thing, peer-to-peer, rubbing shoulders with folks in the organization. And interestingly, and maybe surprisingly, about half of everybody thinks that they're not being paid well enough compared to what their coworker is doing, which if they answer yes to this question may suggest they think they're carrying somebody and somebody else isn't doing their fair share. And again, it may or may not be true. That's a management responsibility to understand who and what and bear the burden of evaluating their contribution. What about, do you think you're underpaid when you consider the amount of work you perform? What percent of everybody would you guess would say yes to that one? 90. About 90 something. Okay, big. Okay, something. I heard a number. 62. Okay, well, not so bad. 68 everybody, so almost 9,000 folks said yes. But have you ever worked anywhere yourselves where you haven't felt overworked and underpaid? I mean, I work for myself, and it's still true. And so that is a performance recognition issue. That's another aspect of pay that falls on the shoulders of the supervisor and the managers to be able to defend why you think or they think somebody should be paid differently in terms of pay progression on your pay program. What about going anywhere else? You get paid better there than you get paid here. Do you think folks are going to believe that's going to be the true statement too? Is the grass greener on the other side of the fence?
Green grass syndrome.
Yeah, the green grass. So what happens when you climb up on the fence, peer over, and jump down?
It's always bad.
Yeah, it's painted concrete. You know? And so it's always harder on the other side than where you were. Perhaps, unless it's an upward mobility opportunity. You're learning, you've acquired skills, and now you can sell your talents at a higher level in a competing organization where you've hit a ceiling here. Maybe that's the only opportunity where you might find some legitimacy. Anyway, so those are some key questions. Identified survey participants, you heard about the possibility of ways of doing that, the local market, key competitors, recruitment area, again, public versus private employers, where to go. So that's a tough question. Now, where is the landscape? Is it all in state? Is it out of state? Are you Utah rural electric competitors? Done some work there with those folks. And we are a group of employers that are multi-state. So they're an interesting crowd. Collect the data. We go after that. We do have access to some online resource. And we're looking at data analysis, current pay, total comp. We have the question about benefits. The total comp value is, it can be quite a significant piece. But in the public arena, it can be very stable. It can be very common because you're measuring up and you're taxed with the same legal expectations like the retirement system. You're not so much in that arena because you have a fair amount of freedom by the nature of the institution. Isn't that true? And so you can shop and do a lot of different things. So here's some data that we're going to tap. The TechNet instrument that we have for the municipals, and again, the APPA is out there. ERI, Economic Research Institute, Rural Electric Membership Survey Databases. Now we got the data in hand, and the challenge is to analyze that. Quality of data can be significant. We're running out of time. Am I about the end of it?
Yep.
Okay. The good stuff is yet to come, but you're going to miss it.
You still got a few minutes.
You got a little? Okay, so let's just kind of migrate through this. Here, it's a little bit of a picture about how we analyze it. So graphs, illustrations, we'll come back to you to help you see how it all falls out. And you start to pursue the questions. How do we establish ourselves or fall in the market? So you look at design, and we heard some things about that from what Matt said, and the designing the pay plans, whether it be me or somebody else, all go through the same exercises. But you look at possibilities in terms of executive and managerial compensation, professional staff, technical, and operational. And you could end up with different pay plans for each one of those, potentially. You look at implementing that, the outcome, individual placement on the pay plan. Are there issues within the structure, peer-to-peer compression, new hires versus long-term, a bunch of stuff like that. So we got to hustle up here. I got to talk a lot faster. So performance, I'm actually going to skip this because we're not dealing with this performance issues, other than to say is you're better off not to do it at all than to do it poorly. Is that a legal position as well? So what are the liabilities if you do it poorly? You know, constructive termination, all kinds of nasty things. Hit that bugger. Kill it.
That's the only reason you're running.
He was flying into my head.
Right.
Crazy. Okay, so when it comes to decision making, these are some areas on your side of the table, the man side that you got to be concerned about: the ability to pay, the nature and size of the organization, the philosophy, willingness to pay based on how you fit in the organization, the nature and diversity of the work, prevailing prices in terms of your regional economy, availability of labor supply. We're going to hit upon that. The value of the work contribution. We don't have to worry about collaborative decision making unless you give it away, which is either unions or associations or that kind of process. Pay supplements, total comp, that is significant. So what does that cost you on average per employee? I'm guessing it's probably close to 40-some% of base pay.
Well, wait a minute though, 'cause so then what you're saying is that this is on the board side of things, you're not doing an analysis of this?
Pay is all part of the analysis.
No,
but
but the incentives and benefits?
yeah, that would be a policy element. You would make a decision about how to implement the utilization or not of incentives and other discretionary benefits.
But how will we know, how will the board know how to compare that to others?
So we can sample. We can sample on that. Some of that will be based on current history as well. You know, what you've liked in the past, what you don't like, what you want to change, and the costs associated with those. And the reputation of the organization, how you want to be viewed in the marketplace, high, fair, or low. I actually had one client that was a county, I won't tell you who, but they wanted to be the lowest paying employer in the area. Okay, but they had control of the marketplace. So learning curve, pay progression are things that you look at. What about non-scheduled, non-monetary uses of other added recognition and compensation? In a meeting with American Fork the other day, I brought up the notion of perpetual pay for last year's effort. You know, do you like that idea? And that factors in a lot to how you structure a performance program. We don't like perpetual pay. So employees are saying that if you put a program together, and these are some of the key things that we think ought to be given some priority treatment. Looking at pay supplements and total comp, regional economics, ability to pay, organizational philosophy, reputation, labor supply and demand. So it's a three-piece puzzle. The prevailing market, the value of the job, contributory value of the employee. But quickly, numbers of things that are benefits to the employee, I'll just drop them down and you can see the different ways that the organization can be improved in these areas. The benefits to the employee are these. I won't read them, but you can spot check them. Benefits to other human resource personnel functions are these. There are benefits to the management arena as well. Organizational design, training issues, goal setting, effectiveness in program administration, planning, scheduling, budgeting. And this is a big, huge benefit in this whole exercise is communication. We'll have interactive opportunities with staff, with board, with management. So timeline, basically about the same, anywhere from 90 to 120 days. The processes can overlap. And now at the end of this presentation, the worth of work we're in it together, if I'm selected to work with you, a balancing act in a lot of ways and a lot of facets. So, thank you.
And your costs are good for how long?
Indefinitely. This is home for me pretty much, and so I'll charge the extra to the places like Lafayette, Windsor, Las Vegas, Bloomfield, and Gardner, Kansas.
Mike,
how much do you get involved in this? Do you do most of the questionnaire, the study surveys? What type of staffing do you have behind you that works with you?
Okay, great question. And my philosophy and my approach for my almost 30 years of doing this publicly is a lot different. I don't use interns. I don't have full-time staff. What I do have, though, I have the competence of professionals currently engaged in the business. So I will go, I'll pull the Utah Retirement Director of Human Resources would come to the table for me. The Human Resource Director for the County Sheriff's Office in Salt Lake, Gary Lynn, she's now HR Director in another organization. The Emergency Communications HR Director. I've got an analyst who used to be on the governor's legislative analyst team and with the Department of the Public Administration out of University of Utah.
So you contract with them?
I basically do, but it's not a contract per se. I just give them a call and say, there's a project here that takes these days, and would you want to be involved? And then I bring him in. And so it's
What do you pay them?
what do I pay him?
No, you do pay them.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're friends, but not that good of
Yeah,
friends, right?
They don't love me that well.
Good.
And so, but absolutely, they will take home their fair share of the project and make a contribution along the way. Let's see, what else?
It may be helpful, there's questions been raised since you had previously, you did our study in 2011 about how that might influence how you perform your services now, whether you would, somehow wedded to those prior numbers. And a second question is, what was your role in setting the management salaries, if you know?
I had no role, actually, once the end of the study came through and delivered the outcomes. And so I don't really know anything about the process beyond the study itself. The rest of the question in terms of
Your objectivity and get me somehow tainted or swayed by the fact that you've done previous work for the company?
it's brand new stuff. This is a new engagement. It deserves renewed treatment. The marketplace has changed. The players are maybe going to be different. And so it's all a brand new undertaking under your control.
We, I think as a group, have a consensus that Truckee was our closest neighbor in what we do as a business. Is there anything in your surveys that you do to adjust Truckee's data to more closely meet ours based on the higher cost of living in the California area, maybe the recreational area of Truckee and so forth? Or do you just bunch them all together with the total collected data and give us an average or a figure based on that?
A couple of different ways to do that. The geographic assessor that's available through ERI, the Economic Research Institute, does allow for those geographic adjusting solutions. Statistically, I have another approach. It's a little quicker and less expensive, but it is, in terms of evaluating the data itself, how reliable is it? How much can we hang our hat upon it, and how much statistical deviation is there between all of the players? Is there consistency in how those jobs are treated, or is there enough discrepancy so that at the end of the day, we need to hang our hat more on our internal arrangements in relationship to jobs than we do the market price tag? So there's a couple of different ways to take a look at that. Do you like Truckee in the mix? Do you not like Truckee in the mix?
Well, I think the thing about that, and we've discussed it to no end, that they are probably the only one in the whole bunch that closely mirrors who we are and what we do. And I don't know that much about Truckee, but I know Heber Light and Power, and I would assume they're involved in the same things and have the same, responsibilities, buying and selling power and so forth. So you'd like to know, that's like early era spending, you spend $200, what is it in today's market? you compare us with Truckee. How does Truckee compare to, you know, can we make the adjustments to say if they were operating here, how would they look compared to us?
Pretty tough, pretty challenging.
Well, yeah, it's an extra,
Yeah.
it's an extra dimension, I think, to what we normally do.
You put you in their shoes and them in yours, part of the tempering of that might include a reality check for where you lose people, who's leaving. And if you don't have attrition influencing the complexion of the workforce, to survey and search far and wide beyond your arm reach is part of the challenge, part of the question. You need to go there. But once it even settles after that, the real question is, knowing who is in the database, whether there's geographic adjustments or not, you come down to where do we want to be in relationship to those, what percentile, again, trendsetter, on average with that group, a little more competitive. So the vision and mission will be the steering element in terms of the final implementation strategy. So all tough questions and all valid, all good stuff.
How did you work through?
I was going to say, on the scope of work we asked to do a study from 1 to 10, is it on the 10 level, high level, or are we at 7 or 8? Can you compare some, what do you think what we're asking to do?
Yeah, that is I'm so used to doing that from top to bottom anyway. We do it all, and but in terms of the RFP, I think the expectations would have you up there in that 8, kind of realm in terms of components to be addressed. Is that what you're asking?
That also, so if we look at different tiers, if we're on an 8, and the board says, well, maybe we don't want to go to a tier 8, let's go down to a tier 5 or 4, we can scale it back down and say, look, maybe we want to just cut some costs on this, maybe more of a general feel with it.
Yeah. Well, again, the big labor-intensive piece on the front end, if you did it, is that job description exercise, the heavy involvement with the workforce. That was and if you're totally happy with all your job descriptions right now, there's a $5,000 to $6,000, reduction in cost. That would lead you to internal equity review as a key element, and the market itself as a key element. So that's a nice adjustment in the fee right there if you went that direction. I did identify in the document itself the treatment of benefits and ways to look at that, but it wasn't priced. But that would be, I think that'd be fairly nominal given the resources that I do have access to for current prevailing benefit practices.
How would you determine, you mentioned, Bob, a minute ago, that if you, there's ways that you adjust, or the philosophy of the company, how do you determine what the philosophy of the company is? Being a trendsetter, being in the middle, or being at the bottom? How do you determine that?
Now that philosophy is simply discussion. It would be right around this table. What are historical frustrations? What is the mission of the organization? Is it being achieved based on historical practice? What would you change tomorrow if we did in terms of our positioning and posture in the marketplace? But ideally, what if you wanted to look at all of those? What would it cost us to be a trendsetter based on the data that we get in here? What would it cost us to be more competitive or less competitive in trendsetting, but above parity? What are the implementation considerations there than the market average? And the comparable position can be discussed and reviewed in light of benefits, because that's the other part of the comp package. So maybe that's not a good answer. But,
Sounds reasonable. We need to make that determination.
yeah, so, as you kick around right in this arena, we all come to the table with experience, with history, public versus private. You've got expectations for the organization. You have the pulse in your hand of the customer base here, and have a pretty good idea of what they want. And I suspect that you've got a pretty good feel too that it's been met. Those visions and those deliverables have been met over time. There'd be a lot of problems that you'd have to be working on, right? So, but you caught me rambling here now.
I think your suggestion, between what public and private is, I mean, that's, to me, the big dividing line of what you base your wages and stuff on, because you're competing with the public sector, utilities, or you're trying to compete with the private sector out there, and both of them are competing for your employees, and you have to find a balance for not losing your employees. I like your comment, at least a training ground for people, get the experience, and they move on somewhere else. And you have to make that consideration when you make a choice what your philosophy is.
See, that's a great comment, because your philosophy will actually translate into that outcome. Job retention versus attrition. And if you don't mind being a training ground, you don't mind the costs associated with being a training ground, you don't mind the potential loss of the talent that you feel like you need, those are crucial. Pacific Corp, are they a player? So they're in the neighborhood. And then you've got some locals, some municipalities that generate and distribute. But so yeah, it's an interesting alternatives to pursue. I like to shoot the moon on the data. If I can get the more data I can get in my hands, the better, because from there on we can what if unlimited. What if we don't do this? What if we do that? What if we want to weight the influence of these guys at our game, at our table, because they are really on our back doorsteps? What if we minimize the influence of some other players or discount them altogether? But what's nice about the tools, when I build it and deliver it, you can sit around the table here and what if without me. You can delete rows of data, you can see how it influences the pay line and how it influences the impact on every individual employee in the organization. But I'd have somebody coached and ready to do that. But just in the throes of that right now, I just delivered on Monday night this week a project to Windsor up there in Colorado to the town board. And the town manager on the front end said, we don't want any critiquing, we don't want any comments, we just want you to see the results. How long do you think that lasted? So the mayor, everybody opened, it's a very volatile discussion item around any elected body's table to look at compensation and how you define where you're going to go and how it's going to be played out.
So after you do the survey, then do you make recommendations, or is your job just end with the survey?
I think recommendations. I'd like to give you some alternatives. And if I have a direction from the board, and my competitor talked about getting that kind of direction, that front-end discussion with you as decision makers, you tailor the outcome to that part of the mission. But I always like to say, here's another alternative. If that option is going to cost you this, are you willing to go another measure to accomplish the retention objective, for example, of your staff? And so, a lot of ground for visitation and discussion. What I do give you minimally is what I call the least cost implementation option, and that is what it takes to bring employees that are found to be below the recommended minimum on this proposed pay plan, bring them into the median, bring them up to minimum. After that, do you have an objective for what's considered to be the midpoint of the pay plan or comp ratio. How long should it take employees to get from the entry level to the midpoint in your program? You want to have some influence on that. You've got a real significant element, though, in terms of compensation and pay progression related to learning curve. So if you start somebody brand new in the organization, how long does it take them to pick up 80, 90, or whatever % of the job and the skills needed to be turned loose on a day-to-day basis to do the things they're hired to do? Some technical jobs take longer to learn, get through that learning curve. Professionals even longer than that. Executives, learning curves maybe does never top out. You might have a very steady climb because every time the board changes, there's a new learning curve with the executive relationships. So that's, I want to call that fun ground, but I don't know if that's fun. I think that's challenging. That's on your table here.
Any other questions on the board?
You have the PowerPoint, is it available for us to?
You can leave that, yeah. We can copy that onto the desktop or copy it onto this laptop if you'd like.
Yeah. I'd like to see that. Somehow you went too fast for me to grasp it. I'm not sure why.
Okay, you have to answer the fly.
No.
Okay,
Did
well,
you
there was a
guys
lot.
get the copy of the original study that we got? Carly, did they get the copy that we got as far as the original study of the salaries? I wonder if that would help.
I'm not sure if I do or not.
The one we were looking at?
No,
No.
that was prior.
Yeah.
You know, it's been perceived a little bit in the public here that there might be some positions that are overpaid, overcompensated for. So would you also make a recommendation, if you did find that, to bring that back into line? I'm not saying
That's
that
always a
exists, I'm just
possibility.
saying it's something that's perceived in the public.
It's always a possibility to find anomalies like that. I can show you a chart here that with one of the customers, in fact, it was West Jordan, I did a study for them just a year or so ago. And then as the charts start to take shape, we find these little black dots falling above the market pay rates, or pay practices. So we do find individuals who may be over market. Tooele County had one of those not that long ago. They had an individual in the road department getting paid, considerably greater than coworkers. Well, what it ended up being was the sheriff lost the election, got hired in the road department, and they never changed his pay. So they get paid. Anyway, stuff happens, things happen, but that will be influenced dramatically too by where we posture the pay plan itself, and mitigated by the question of the worth of work and the work of the worker.
That's what I was gonna say, because maybe you need to evaluate why that dot is out there.
Yeah.
Say, oh, okay, here is the reason.
What does account for that? If it's explainable, then you can stay where you're at. And defend it. That's the key word, is a defensible position that you want to present to the public and those that you have to account to. So I'm going to copy this file onto this. Is that okay?
You just go ahead and drag it onto the desktop. Make sure everybody gets it.
What I didn't have time for was this other file here. So I'm excited about it, but you don't know.
All I've got is time. I was just being distracted by the flies. He's gone.
I think.
You had enough?
Yeah, we have.
You've had enough.
Yeah, thanks for
Okay,
your
well-
presentation. It's been coming up in business today, on your hand and proposal. What, the board, we're not gonna make a decision on this tonight, just gonna evaluate information we've received. And next boarding, we'll have a meeting, we'll have discussion on if you wanna pursue, contracting this out or not, or wanna wait a few months. They'd like to do something you need to think about the next couple of weeks, but some very good information, how their studies are put together, how they're performed. I mean, you got a feel of the company, I think, with Mike here and Matt there, who they are, what they represent, what background they have. Well, So it's important to me to listen to them and personally meet them, have a chance to, a little discussion across the board. I feel like you can communicate with somebody.
Yeah, it's helpful. In fact, one of the gals that is on my team, typically Galen Larson, I mentioned her, she used to be a consultant for those guys. But it was prior to these new owners. These guys haven't owned the company since its origination. But they've been around, so they know what they're doing. Okay.
Thank you so much. That's very much.
We'll get back to our agenda items, so we have before the board our minutes for June 9th and July 30th. If there's not any modifications or changes to those minutes, the chair would look for a motion to approve the minutes. Any changes or modifications to the minutes, let's see.
I looked for one, I think on the audit committee, I think we needed to add Steve Capps, remember where we did?
We did add him somewhere, I said.
Yeah, but it wasn't in the minutes at all.
I think I read it somewhere.
You did?
I think so, maybe it was on the 11th. August 11th.
And then I'll get you his contact information, so we just do that. I thought I read that his name wasn't there.
Have we ever rewritten the audit committee resolution, Joe?
No,
That includes Steve, but we talked about it, right?
right, we said we didn't need to do it this time.
Okay, yeah. So Joe's actually got that document.
It was
Any
two-
changes.
Two things I was gonna change that Bob and I talked about. One is to put caps in, but the other one, which is really maybe more important, is to expand the mandate a little bit for the audit committee to include budget review, because it's not expressly called out in the audit committee resolution, because the audit committee is really created to do the audit.
Yeah, the annual audit. So, I mean, we're doing stuff now that really wasn't drawn up in the audit committee specifications.
Yeah, it's there.
Yeah, there it is.
So I'll make the motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second
For
motion.
June 9th and July 30th.
A first and a second. Any discussion of the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Just a suggestion I'd like to do maybe with the board, if they're acceptable, is on our minutes and our packets we're receiving, I'd like to have emails from your councils, and just so they get a part of it too, so they'll get an email that says this is what's on their agenda, requirements, that goes into all of our councils. So a lot of times our council are asking what information is available, may not be keeping up time with what's going on, but that maybe some email, electronic copy, would you be objective to that your council members would see, they can read our minutes, they can read what's on the agenda, they can see what's coming. Does anyone have an objection to that? We've got email addresses to send them out to our councils members.
No, that's fine. We go over it in our board reports, but that's great.
That way, if you do board reports, you still get information, it still keeps them up to date, that keeps them informed what's going on. Do you feel comfortable with doing that?
Fine, as long as they are,
It's
Like
supposed
what,
to,
as far as it wanted to be seen
Yeah,
on.
if you have any that want list, no, but
I don't think you've got emails for all of our board directors.
Well, and it's also posted on the public notice website, so if anybody subscribes to that feed, they get like a notice that it's been posted and they can,
It'll come up,
link it in
it'll
and
boing you, when
download
there's an
everything
update
too,
to
so
it, so.
either way.
But this is more proactive, is what you're saying. Appreciate that.
we're supposed to keep informed their councils. I thought this is one way we can say, here it comes to you. If they want to read it, it's up to them, and it's good information.
All you gotta do is add a name to it.
Yeah, it clicks on it.
It really doesn't take any more time.
We're trying
It's
to.
easy. That's great.
We need to amend our schedule for a board meeting. We'll have it at 3:30. We need to make a motion to adjust our board time schedule starting at 4 p.m.
Did we decide to stay on Wednesday then, the last Wednesday, because Pauline had she was concerned last time about her council meeting starting on time and stuff for being here.
That was
You remember that
That was the
discussion?
extra council meeting though, wasn't it? Wasn't your regular?
Our regular one, but right.
Are you on
because
the
it's so-
second and fourth?
Yeah,
Wednesday?
but right now we're having them pretty much, so I just would have to be out of here by 6:30. So,
Did they object to changing dates? It's tough to come here and then go to your city council meeting, especially being a mayor, you're in charge of directing the meetings. I'm not objecting if you want to change the dates for a little bit. Bob's, yours is on Wednesdays too, or
Mine's Thursday.
Thursdays?
First Thursday of the month, so it won't conflict with our company.
Jay, you're still Wednesday, we're not conflicting with any counties.
Can we go first and second, third? We're all going.
And your first one is early in the month too though, isn't it?
yeah, we're the
You
second.
always have a second.
Second before.
Most of the time we do, not always. In the winter we probably won't, but most of the time we can be out here though by 6:30. Which I'm fine as long as I'm out here by 6:30.
I'll let you go at 6:30.
I just may have to leave because sometimes it's
I think we're
6:30.
getting better. I mean, unless you have a discussion like we had tonight.
Yeah, but that's okay, because
I think we're getting a lot better.
So let's keep the date on Wednesday.
Okay.
And we'll keep it, we need to change our board time for the record to 4 PM, so from 3:30 to 4 PM.
Okay, I'll make that motion to do that.
I'll second.
Have a first and second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's passed, so. we
Okay,
will
now
be-
I won't be here in September, I will be gone, but there are 5, of course you have them on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, right?
Second is just a work meeting.
But you have one on the 1st Wednesday, which would be the 1st of October, so that wouldn't work for you. I was gonna say, we do it on October 1st and October 29th, but we'll make it work. I'll figure something out, I'll send somebody in. Or I would be available by phone too.
We can Skype you. We know how to Skype now.
We don't have Skype, I can do
We're
that.
getting high tech, we're on the movies now, and
Yeah. But yeah, I just will be out of town on the 24th of September. So,
Our board meetings will then be on the 4th Wednesdays of the month, and start at 4 PM.
okay.
For the board, we have our June financial statements. Board's had a chance to review it. Any comments or thoughts? Not, the chair looks for a motion to approve June financial.
make the motion to accept the July financial statement.
I'll second.
Should be the June I had.
Oh, what about on
I think
Thursday?
that's a typo. Okay.
It's July.
Sorry, I'm reading off the agenda here, but yeah. Okay,
So
July
on
financials.
these ones where we're, you know, how much the percentage of the year is lapsed and where we're over on some of them, is that just because of the way that they were changed in your,
You want to talk about them?
well, like there's just that one that's way over.
Yeah,
The gas generation.
Professional.
gas generation is trending over because a lot of our energy is coming out of the power plant because market power has been high. And we're trending down a little bit on power purchases. We do have one double going to the accrual-based accounting. We do have one double entry of power costs. And then on the building maintenance, that's just due to our spreading of the costs to maintain buildings into the correct bucket.
That's what I assumed that all was. I was just wanted to make sure, I figured that's what it was, because Bart said he was moving things into different buckets, and, okay. I assumed that's what they all were, but I thought I would just ask on those.
And then on the professional services,
Yeah, just over
that's
budget.
just over. Okay.
Well, that's miscellaneous too, it's not specifically only professional services, and there's just some stuff on the previous budget around that will be factored, and there's weird little
Okay.
things, so.
All right.
I
would point out that overall expenses are trending down.
Yeah, there were lots of them. Yeah, there were just a couple that jumped out.
What's the motion for for the July financial?
I think Bob
I
made
did.
it.
Bob, okay.
Seconded it.
Jeff, second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Next before the board, the July warrants.
Is that,
Just the chairman, no, actually, I did receive.
I just don't want, I got to resolve it. They put training back in, so Jake's got his.
That may be part of the reason why
Pretty
there's no.
pricey, but it's beneficial down the road. So.
I remember we approved the July warrants as presented. Second.
Second by Mr. Patterson. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Could I take this time here, there's one item on the warrants that brought my attention, and I see that we've got, Jake, we've got your training back in place, and I'd just like to thank you guys and whoever that put that back.
That was actually done before.
Was it?
That was done in towards the end of May. So we just didn't pay it until now because the company that had done it didn't invoice us until then. So we have not done any training.
So we're still hanging on your next phase. Could you share with us on this advanced control system training, just what that is? Just a little
That training was a lot of Harold's guys and myself. It's for our distribution automated system map. So basically our SCADA system takes our distribution system and automates it in real time, so that if a breaker opens or whatnot, you can see that outage. Or we can do switching on it. We can open and close switches manually on the map for switching circuits. So that was the advanced training to help Harold's guys in the mapping department have the tools and skills to manage that map, and instead of paying ACS, 20, 30 grand a year to do it for us. So that's what we
So
decided.
is this the big screen, and then you
It
get
is.
into automated switching and controls
Well,
more as
we haven't. We've put the system in. We haven't grown upon that system. We've had it for about 4 years now, so we've just kind of progressed through. We haven't added. I mean, our substation. Anything in the substation that gets added on there. But out in the field, we haven't added any automation devices yet. But we've talked about doing some of that stuff.
So we're still on hold with some of the other critical training that may benefit us in the long run.
Yep.
I take my thanks back, but I do appreciate your explanation on that.
You bet.
The audit committee meets once a month with BART. We appreciate the time you spent this last week. Just a suggestion, the board, where the audit committee's meeting with BART on the CFO, would be wise to have them go, not wise, but look at the financials and the warrants, and basically look at that where they can basically sign off and prove it with that point, but have all the information still come to the rest of the board, to where they're basically giving their okay, and if there's something that a particular board member wants to look at, we can maybe talk about it here, but maybe try to move that off the agenda items where that audit committee's meeting with them and going through that. Maybe we could just have them, maybe that's part of their assignments, to look at the financials. Do you want to still bring it to the board to review, or?
I'd still like to bring it to the board review.
We'll get it anyway, I think, in the packet, won't we?
You still get all the package to read, these financials will be all on the board, but maybe quick reviews to voting on them. The audit committee's already done that part of it, checked off, they've gone through the financials and the warrants for that month. So the board still has the information in front of them, but the audit committee pretty well check it off and approve it and sign off that they've looked at the financials. Is that
The
something?
committee wasn't gonna meet every month, were they?
I'd like to meet them once a
We're
month.
gonna meet once a month.
Are gonna meet once a month.
Alan, we've talked in the past about doing a consent calendar. And you could maybe roll that with the minutes and you could create a consent calendar that might speed things along a little more for the board after the audit committee's approved it.
That's what we do.
Yeah, just go ahead and vote on something like that.
I'm not trying to push things through, but I'm also thinking it may improve our time a little bit with the audit committee. That's part of the job description, I think, to go through that. They're already going through it. Most of the board's already on it.
I didn't know they were going to meet every month.
We are for a while.
Okay.
So if we approved it, it could just go then on the consent calendar. And then it still comes back here, and if there's any other questions, it can always be pulled off.
It can still be pulled up and say, look, I
And
have
discussed.
a question.
Okay.
Do they feel comfortable with that?
Do you think that was a good call?
No, I just, for some reason, I just got interested in who might be sitting in the extra room there, so I looked back, it's good to have people sitting back there.
So we may have to make any amendments to the agendas for that, or for the audit committee to do that, or is there something we need to change as a board?
Well, I was gonna include in the audit committee's, I think the audit committee would still recommend to the board that they approve the audit, or the financial information. However, the only question is whether we put it as an individual agenda item or create a consent calendar with the minutes, because usually we don't have any discussion on minutes and the warrants, and we can just combine them all and then just have one vote instead of 4 or 3 or whatever it is.
It's honestly a great thing that Midway does that.
Yeah, and you guys do too, don't you? You have a consent calendar.
Yeah, but the warrants and the facts aren't on
Oh,
voting.
and ours are always on there. Ours are always on
But
there.
you get copies of them, but they're not voted on.
You do vote, it is a vote, the consent calendar is a vote, and Jesus not talking
And you
about
still
it.
vote about it, and we'll put it on a consent calendar.
Just go ahead.
We've talked about that in the past, we thought we could speak to
Let's
it.
try it, see how it works.
Yeah.
Doesn't hurt to try it.
Do you want us to include the minutes and all?
Yeah, because if there's a question on it,
Then we
then you
just
just raise the question.
Yeah.
Okay, good, we'll do that.
Wipes out a whole bunch of things from
Is
what
it
Yeah. If there's a question, you can raise
You
the
can
question.
take
Any member
anything
can,
off there,
on
anything.
anything.
on any of the vouchers, someone can raise the question.
Next time.
Do you want we're gonna meet on the 15th of September, Monday the 15th at 10 a.m.
The
Think
audit
Steve
committee
is
is.
there?
Well, he just needs to be notified. My email was down, and so it was till Bob called me
Okay,
before I could notify him when he was out of town.
okay.
So I'll get his information to Bart, I think, would be the,
That's the ideal place.
yeah. And then you just, because he texted me back, said, oh, Pete, I could have been there, but I was,
Well, it was kind of last minute too, so we have our next one scheduled
okay.
for September, so we need to at least have.
Well, let me just get you his information, then you can just communicate with him. There's no sense in,
No intermediaries, we don't need.
Next item we have is on discussion on board secretary. Mandy Anderson's been our secretary. She did a fantastic job. We love her. She still would like to pursue in that, but I don't know if the board was thinking maybe because they have somebody in-house to do it with the company and then somebody outside. That was kind of discussion we left last time. I'll open up to the board what you would like to do or what direction you have, but Mandy would still like to be our board secretary if you want to keep her on, or if you want to change that and keep it in-house with an employee.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
The concept is we hope that Mandy would continue, whatever the decision is, to continue to do the minutes. That was quite a big burden for Carly, and it's cheaper for us because we'd have to pay Carly overtime to do it. So we would have Mandy do the minutes.
Kind of bring me up to speed. I just looked in the June 9th notes and she submitted her resignation or something. All this stuff, I said, I don't know anything about this stuff.
Yeah, originally the board secretary was Carly, and do some conflicts of interest, or whatever you want to call it, with some of the issues we had. Carly submitted a resignation to be the board secretary. And what we've looked through was who could be available from the company side for employment, for somebody inside the company to do it, and no one wanted to do it. So then we went outside the company, and Mandy was willing to be able to offer her services being a recorder in the city, so we appointed Mandy to be the board secretary.
So Carly won't be here anymore.
No, Carly's still here. It's just a matter of how much you want to get, responsibility you want to give Carly. And I don't mind the point of allowing Mandy still do the minutes, if that's...
But she won't continue to be called the board secretary. I think there's some documents in the bylaws that give special responsibilities to board secretary, and that's the announcements for meetings and so forth. And can't remember the last page, what is it, Joel, that the board secretary is to receive any claims or what?
Yeah,
what is
service of claims.
Okay, so, and that would be better handled in-house. So if,
So what's her job title then? Carly's?
Carly, if you changed, she would be the board secretary, but Mandy would still take the responsibilities of keeping the minutes if you wanted to do that.
So Mandy could just become a recorder.
Exactly.
It sounds like from what Carly's time, it's probably better that we don't give that duty to her also, and still keep Mandy if she wanted to, part of the, we call it the board recorder then.
Yeah,
So is that acceptable to everybody?
is that good? It's wonderful, yeah.
So are we looking for a motion?
What motion then would be to...
we gotta ask Carly, did you know?
Yeah, Carly had said yes. We did that last time, we didn't we? We took a vote and he asked.
Pretty sure.
Well, I'd move that we appoint Carly as board secretary and retain Mandy as board recorder.
Yeah.
I second the motion.
Any discussion on the motion? Carly, do you feel comfortable? Mandy, you feel comfortable that works with your schedule?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
You don't sound convincing.
Oh,
yeah, that's okay.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So our new board secretary will be Carly, and Mandy's our recorder. Thank you. Jason had some discussion on our UAMPS board. There's appointing a new member on the board here, or employee.
Yeah, I mean, very, very easily. UAMPS allows the UAMPS board representative designation from this organization. Requires 2 alternates in case something were to happen to me as the UAMPS board representative. And the 2 prior alternates were Blaine Stewart and Troy Klungervik. Both are retired and no longer work for your organization. And we need 2 more alternates. I would recommend Bart Stanley Miller and Emily Brandt as the 2 alternates for the UAMPS board.
Have they been asked if they would like to do that?
No.
We work for them, we just take orders.
Unlike Carly.
They were informed. It can be anybody within the organization.
Were they willing?
This one is.
Yeah.
It's closely related to both of them. I mean, they're both engaged in some way or other with UAMPS, and it's...
Emily does all of the like back office scheduling of energy. So she has a pretty good understanding of UAMPS and, you know, the issues and stuff that's going on there on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. She works pretty closely with me. And Bart, of course, pays power bill which is one of the bigger bills we get every month.
So it's on the past, how many times has the alternate had to sit in for you?
You know,
Frequent?
like, I was the alternate for Craig Broussard, if you go back that far. And, you know, it's just during his transition, until the board could meet, that I think I filled in as an alternate. It's not very often. We do try to keep the alternates up to date by going to some of the UAMPS meetings, so if they do have to fill in, they're kind of up to speed with the goings on at that organization, so.
That's important.
Yeah, okay.
There will be some time requirements for those staff to, you know, hit a UAMPS meeting with me here and there, so that they stay up to speed on it.
You want a motion?
Yes.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we assign or appoint Bart Miller and Emily Brandt as alternates for UAMPS.
I second the motion.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Two new board members, Bart and Henry. So, turn the time over to.
We don't need to do the resolution.
Well, I'm concerned. I thought it was in the packet, I didn't realize it was in the packet.
So you're creating a resolution?
I know I have it here.
Okay. There's a resolution that just reaffirms this board's direction with this change that keeps me as the UAMPS board representative and names those two as the alternates. Jill will print that out and get that in front of you.
Well, why don't we just make it as part of the motion, authorize the chairman to sign the resolution as directed?
Okay, fine.
So
we just-
moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Go to department reports.
Are you gonna do the audit committee report, or are we just skipping that one?
No, that's
Isn't that what's next?
next.
Colleen wants to do it.
No, he would just jump to department reports and.
That audit committee,
Is that
that's,
on your agenda?
I must have got the update.
Oh, sorry, Alan.
don't want
I think he's working off the first agenda, we added that later.
Okay.
I printed one of Mr. Grant so we have the audit committee report.
The audit committee met this last Monday with everybody but Mr. Capson. And we met on a few different items, first of which being the two presentations that were recently given to the Heber City Council work group meeting. One which was done by Mark Anderson, the city manager, and the other done by Bob Goodall, did I pronounce his name right? A member of the public. A few of the audit committee members had a few questions concerning the presentation that was, or both those presentations, so management helped to clear up any confusion that may have been on some of those. And then we discussed whether the company needs to make an official statement in the format, and it was decided that doing such is not really merited at this time outside of expressing appreciation to both individuals for taking the time to do a review. And we'll obviously take any comments or thoughts into consideration as we enter the budget cycle and human resources reviews. So that's pretty much that on the presentation today. Anything you'd like to add to that? Okay. The next item we talked about was our current impact fee structure, the values, the amounts that we're eligible for, and whether or not a new study is merited. And then we moved from there to talking about the importance of getting a demand charge established in our rate structure sooner than later, especially with some of our net metering situations that are arising. So, as a result of those two conversation points, Jason and I were tasked with going out and finding out from Pender and Associates what they would cost to refresh their latest studies. We've heard from Mr. Pender, the impact fee study would be right around 12,000 worst case scenario, and the cost of service would be about 18,000 worst case scenario. I think that's
We
pretty-
sort of discussed too on that impact that we're still sort of hanging for more data, and it would maybe be not to our advantage to address that quite as early as the other, and maybe put that off. I think we discussed as a committee to put that off till next year, and then we'll have more data with which to work, and it'll be more accurate overall, so,
On the impact fee study.
on the impact fee.
But then the other one really needs to be looked at,
the cost of service.
the cost.
In my discussions with Mr. Pender, we talked about possibly with this go around of the cost of service study to include that middle block of commercial, and really look at it as far as a demand charge and not necessarily service charge oriented. I think that we're quickly getting more and more data on that middle block as those meters get changed out, and I think that the next time we do that, we will go about that cost of service study that way, where we look at that middle block of commercial with the demand charge and not just trying to recover those costs in a service fee.
So we'll be more focused on demand and not have a service fee connected with those, or will they still be a service fee? I know it was $12.21.
It would be a demand charge
And not the other.
with that middle block.
Yeah, probably more palatable.
Well, and more accurately recovering that rate with a demand
Use,
read.
you have to make them what they're using, they're paying for what they're using.
So I guess really what we're looking at here is timeline for this type of stuff. I really think after meeting with management following the audit committee that we could really push our second point of interconnect cost and try to get those costs nailed down to a point where we feel confident putting them in the system impact study and recovering those costs. They were not included in the last system impact study. That will change the data significantly if we put that second point of interconnect substation and the scaling for new load with that into the system impact study. So
You still think later on that, Jason, rather than sooner? I mean, we talk
I think
more
that we
close to
push
the end of the
it.
year.
I really think that we really push that and try to get that ready to go out towards the end of the year with the ability for this board to take a hard look at Mr. Pender's results in early January so that we can get those impact fees where this body like that review done. I mean, that's kind of the direction I'm feeling from this body is that you really want to review those. That would give us a good review on that.
So we push them both out till the first of the year?
Not,
Or the other, we just do
We
one?
would just work to make sure we got updated information sooner on those substations
Right.
to where we could do a legitimate impact study.